On today's episode of the podcast, I'm joined by Lan Cow and her daughter, Harlan Van Cow. Lan Cow is a refugee of the Vietnam War. She is the author of multiple excellent books, including Monkey Bridge and The Lotus and the Storm. She is a professor of law at the Chapman University School of Law. Previously, she's taught at Brooklyn Law School, Duke University School of Law, the University of Michigan Law School, and William and Mary Law School. Lan is generally regarded as an internationally recognized expert specializing in international business and trade, international law, and development. In her latest book called Family in Six Tones, A Refugee Mother and American Daughter, Lan co-writes this book with her daughter Harlan. Harlan is a recent high school graduate who will be attending university in the fall and plans to study economics and philosophy while continuing her writing career. So in this podcast, Lan and Harlan and I talk about their latest book, Family in Six Tones. I think and I hope that if you enjoy this podcast, you would enjoy this book and this conversation that we have today. The book is about a lot of things. It's about the Vietnam War and the experience of being a refugee in America, the experience of being an immigrant, and the complex web of emotions and relationships that go into this process of assimilation and identity formation. It's about the relationship between family and mother and daughter, and it's about the way we treat each other as individuals and cultures. And in this episode, during this conversation, we talk about a lot of that. We talk about the Vietnam War. We talk about Lan's refugee experience in America and the complexities and nuances of immigration and assimilation and discrimination at times. We talk about personal identity and the importance of finding equilibrium and balance in your life. We talk about memory, letting go versus remembering, and how you find a balance between those two things. We talk about the bystander effect, particularly as it relates to relationships and conversations with other people. We talk about the high school experience in America in the modern day. Going along with that, we talk about social media and the ways that it seems to incentivize negative interactions. And we also talk about the concept of the American dream, what American values are and what that means. I really enjoyed their book, and I really enjoyed getting a chance to sit down and have a conversation with both Lan and Harlan. So all that being said, I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Thanks for listening. So I guess I was hoping we could start. I know this is kind of a big question, but maybe both of you could introduce yourself a little bit and talk about what led you to want to write a book together.
So I'll go first. My name is Lan Cow, and I teach I teach law at law schools. I've taught in many different law schools, but I'm currently at Chapman University Law School, and that's in Orange, California, which is in Southern California. And most of my writing actually is legal research, but I've written some fiction, and this is my first memoir. So the idea came to us through Viking, my publisher. It was not an idea that either of us initiated, and it came out of a NPR interview, and the format was Harlan asking questions and me answering her questions. She came up with the questions herself, so they didn't originate with NPR. So this was NPR StoryCorps, and we did the interview when Harlan was 12. So that was quite a while ago. And the interview didn't run until 2018, which was the 50th anniversary of the Tet Offensive. So because of that event, StoryCorps ran the interview, at least the segment that dealt with the Tet Offensive. And when it aired, Viking editors happened to hear it and approached us to do this work together. So that's how the project was birthed.
Okay, my name is Harlan Van Cow. I just graduated high school. I've lived in California for about 7 years. Before that, I lived in Virginia. I always kind of wanted to be a writer, but more so for movies. The writing of the book the idea was presented to me, even though, I probably would have wanted to pursue writing anyway. When I was older, I never thought to do it when I was like 15. I started it when I was 15. I just finished it maybe like 9 months ago. And then I finished editing it like 9 months ago. The editing process itself took a really long time.
Yeah, the editing took basically as much as the writing of it. We had rounds and rounds of edits because we had 2 editors who were substantive editors. They were great. They each read the book, gave comments. I think we had 3 rounds of edits just with them. And then we had copy editors, various copy editors, and then production editors. It's very involved. I was astounded by the involvement.
Yeah, well, I guess that makes sense because the book follows kind of a format where it goes like Lon chapter, Harlan chapter, Lon chapter, Harlan chapter. So it's kind of a simple format, but there's so much emotion and kind of nuance to the book. So, Lon, you talk about your experience as a refugee from the Vietnam War. So I was wondering if you could maybe talk about that a little bit.
Well, I came to my first destination in America was actually Avon, Connecticut, and that's because the American who took me out of Vietnam in April of 1975, his family lived there. So I left with him and stayed there maybe for, 3-4 months. Excuse me. Then my parents came. And during that time is a very contentious period in American history, both the war and the aftermath. And I think that when you had so many refugees entering the U.S., it created somewhat of an internal shock in this country. And I think all the cleavages that had existed in America during the war, those cleavages became more pronounced or resurfaced, I would say, in 75 when all the refugees came. So in many ways, we were reminders, and our presence, I think, created a lot of reverberations. Like even in California, as I mentioned in the book, and this is a historical fact, Governor Brown was really against Vietnamese refugees being resettled by the federal government in Camp Pendleton. So, because I was a very sensitive kid, I was very aware of all these things. I did a lot of research in 75 when I lived in Connecticut. And I realized that even though America is certainly a nation of immigrants and refugees, our presence was a big jolt. And it was an issue. The war was an issue even for American vets who returned. So if it's an issue for the vets who are Americans, I anticipated, and I was right, that it would be an issue for many of us who came from Vietnam. So my first 4 years were very turbulent in high school and hard for me.
Part of the book, I think you bringing up sort of the reverberations of history and what you kind of went through and what you've lived through your life. And then part of it is about how those reverberations impact Harlan and the way she lives her life, and kind of the way that her high school experience and your high school experience, although in some ways totally different, you have this kind of connecting tissue where there's similarities and they kind of mirror each other. So I was wondering if Harlan, you could comment on, do you see any ways in which your mom's experience, going through all the things she just talked about, how has that affected you as you've been growing up?
I think because we're so close, and I mean, I slept in her bed until I was like 11 probably, because that's just like a cultural thing, I think, with the Vietnamese. So I've always felt this trauma. And even though now that I'm 18, I just turned 18, and I'm an adult, I see how different we really are in our personalities. We are so connected in the sense that, as you said, like through high school, even though our experiences of isolation were very different, I mean, we still were both feeling isolated. It's a different thing, though. I think she just had some problems making friends, and people were definitely out to get her. I never had that feeling in high school. Like, I never felt like people were actually there to knock me down or to set me back, whereas my mother literally had teachers give her grades lower than what she deserved purposely, just because they didn't want an immigrant to surpass their white students. So I never had anything like that. I think also I'm half, so I never had to experience any kind of Asian discrimination. I don't look Vietnamese, I don't think. I look more white. So I feel like all that bad stuff was filtered out for me. But I mean, growing up with a mother like Lon Cow, kind of, I mean, I grew up differently from all the other kids because from a very young age, I'm already learning how to, I guess, prepare for the worst. I mean, I remember I was like 4 or 5, and she would test out different spots in the house where I would hide if a burglary happened. So she would like put me underneath the sink and see if I could fit there and tell me to wait. And then she'd be like, if you hear anything, you stay in there forever. And we lived in a gated community in a huge house with very good security. And then she'd put me like in the closet under clothes. Like, she would test different places upstairs, and she would tell me all the things that could go wrong. But then she would also culture me a lot. Like with art, I had these flashcards where I would have to learn all the famous paintings and artists. By the time I was like 9, I pretty much knew everything. Like, I could go to a museum and I would know exactly who did the painting without looking at the little label, and she would test me. So I don't know. And so I think all of that, in a way, without me knowing, definitely changed my sense of humor, my style, my view of the world, my perception of people. I mean, in a good way, but also it wasn't always to my advantage in high school, because I think my intelligence was a little bit different than, like, it doesn't mean the other kids were stupid, but I think my kind of intelligence was probably like not in the norm for them. Definitely made it difficult.
And I definitely want to talk about, and I definitely want to get your thoughts on the kind of the high school situation that we find ourselves in as a society. But before we get there, I wanted to ask Lon about that response that Harlan just gave there. There's a line in the book where you kind of talk about the mother-daughter relationship and that bond, and you kind of struggled early on, like, what do you want to show your daughter? And like, I feel like I made that connection to my podcast or, teaching, or it's like, what kind of view of the world do you want to give to people? Do you want to present the world as good? Do you want to show people the good? Do you want to, expose them and warn them about the bad and the evil? So I was wondering if you could talk about how you kind of thought about that or balanced those issues.
Well, that's an astute question, because it's something I struggled with myself. I myself passed down some of the warnings that I got from my parents to my kid, right? So my father was at one point the airborne commander of the South Vietnamese Airborne. And the airborne troops were considered one of the elite troops in South Vietnam, kind of like the Marines here. And in 1963, there was a coup that was sponsored by the CIA, and they had paid some Vietnamese generals to overthrow President Diem. That was in November 1963. And the people who organized the coup, many of them were my father's good, if not one of his best friends. And they lured him into the military headquarters under the pretenses of a lunch. And then once he was there, he was locked up and ordered to participate in the coup. Otherwise, he would be executed. And there were other commanders who were commanders of the special forces in Vietnam who refused to participate in the coup, and they were taken out and executed right on the spot. So, that event really was a recurring theme as I was growing up. Sort of like, the only people who can betray you are the people you trust. Because, of course, if you don't trust them, they would never be in a position to betray you. That was a very terrifying paradox to me. So I grew up with the sense of the world as a place that has a lot of duplicity, and that it is an undercurrent that sometimes you don't see if the right conditions don't shine the light on them. But they're sort of there, like electricity. It's there. And if you plug in the outlet, then you're going to see it. But it's not like it's not there. It's just sometimes you're lucky enough that you live a sort of life where that duplicity doesn't rear its head, right? And of course, we were in a country at war, and one of my uncles was a Viet Cong, and he had to live a double life, and he visited us, and we had to hide him. So the undercurrent of there being things that are there, but you have to hide, danger, that's kind of like a shadow part of my growing up life. And the Tet Offensive itself was an ambush, right? So these things can happen. Now, when I came to America, it was also a shock because we didn't expect the war to end in loss. So that's another surprise. So I would say that the thing that is most, that I had passed on to Harlan is that I did so consciously, is for her to be prepared, right? So whether the world is good or bad, you need to be prepared for the worst. So there's always the plan B, a plan C. And I don't think she particularly likes that. And I don't know if she accepts it, but that's what I've always imparted. As to, and so, hiding places was kind of like, a plan B if something happens. I did worry. I remember being very conscious. I did worry about telling her that the world is bad because I sometimes think, children need a sense of innocence. So I remember that when I read Othello to her, she was actually very little, but a friend of mine gave me a series of Shakespeare, a collection of Shakespeare that was for children. And we read Othello together, and I struggled with whether or not I could tell her the whole thing about, Othello being a victim of racism, actually, right? And whether to introduce that notion to her. So I think I did a little bit, but very, very carefully. So it's a balance, but I think that for me, because of my own upbringing, like the specific stories that were told to me, so those were explicit, but also just by the condition in which I grew up, just the historical background. I don't think I can help but impart some of that sense of an impending doom, a possibility of an ambush somehow to her. And I'm not saying it's really good to do that. It's hard for me not to do it given our history.
That's so interesting, just because as I was reading the book, that's kind of what I was thinking about, was like, there's all this crazy stuff going on in society today, and it's almost like there is no starting over. Everything is just kind of a continuation of the things that came before it. And I think having a measured and kind of reflecting approach where you're kind of doing that balancing act, like you said, is important because, to me, that's what history is all about, is learning lessons from the past and, imparting that on to the next generation. And to me, it's interesting how those experiences kind of become your identity. So for me, reading the book, one of the themes of the book was this kind of internal battle that both of you seem to be having at different points in your life, where it's like, who am I and what is it that makes me who I am? So Harlan, you were talking earlier about, being half or Vietnamese or American, or, there's mother, daughter, there's your relationship with your peers, on like a physical level or an academic level. So I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts on kind of that idea of identity, like what makes you who you are.
Well, I think my struggle with identity, it never came from like my heritage. It was never like, oh, do I want to act more Asian or do I want to act more white? Like, it was never like that at all. Because I thought it was great being two things, because I feel like Asians have a very good work ethic, because as we talk about, like, they're recovering from something, they're constantly trying to improve. And my dad was, when he had me, he was already at the end of his career, so he had all the experience in the world to pass down. He had made a lot of money, like enough to support us well. He had seen pretty much all of the world. I mean, he was like 70 at that point. So I had the best of everything. So I don't think my struggle for what I want, like, I think my struggle about exactly who I was came from how trusting do I want to be. I went through a point where I was very naive, especially from going from middle school into high school. It never occurred to me that kids spread rumors about each other. And maybe that's stupid, but I think it's just because myself, my own personality, I don't really care what other people do. Nothing is really news to me. I don't care to judge anybody on it. So if I confided in a girl about something going on in my life that was out of the ordinary, it didn't even occur to me at age 14, that she would twist my words and spread it around and make me look a certain way, or that people would, that it would isolate me further. I mean, I think that was a big mistake. I don't think I was smart there. But after that, I kind of went to the opposite side where I completely numbed out. I think that's when I started therapy, because I was compensating for being really careless with trust. And then it's only when I changed schools did I kind of found this balance for normalcy. I think that's when I had my first boyfriend, my first like actual like close female friendship in high school. I learned a lot, and I think the issue for me about finding myself was more so in like trust, not in like a different kind of identity. If that makes sense. What about you, Mommy?
Well, the trust issue, as I mentioned, because of my father's personal experience, even historically, the trust between the United States and South Vietnam. So trust is an issue for me, but it was not the identity issue. My identity issue was what happened after 75. And I was thrust into a new country and realizing that this is the country that I'm going to be living in. It's not a visit. It's not a tourist trip. So it had a lot to do with the process of becoming an American. It's a tentative process. And I think probably all immigrants from prior groups have gone through this. And that is, if you're not born here, right? Harlan was born here, so I think she's an American. And because she is an American, she has the comfort to see the positive parts of Asian culture and embrace it because it's farther down for her, right? Whereas I think for me, the process of becoming an American was very much kind of like learning how to drive a stick shift. You're going to sputter, and your car is going to jerk, and it's not going to be a smooth ride because you just don't know how much gas to press, how much of the clutch to let go. It's very similar to that. And I think my identity, I know what the right identity should be, which is to have a mix of being ambidextrous, right? To pick the parts of Vietnamese or Asian culture that is beneficial, and to reject the part that I don't like, and to pick the parts of America or the West that I like. But that's if you're very evolved. I mean, if you get to the point where you can find that equilibrium, great. But the process, the journey is full of pain, because some of the Asian stuff that you think is great can make you look like a weird nerd when you're in high school, right? Like deferred gratification is a very big thing in Asian culture. Don't go out and play now in high school. Don't go to the party. I spent all my weekends at the library because, interestingly, I thought of becoming educated as the biggest, the fastest and most surefire way to become assimilated is through education. But to get there, that means I have to really work because it's not my native language. So I had to go to the library. And to go to the library meant, none of my peers were really doing that. So I was very ostracized and segregated in high school. So the very route that I thought would allow me to be assimilated in the short run created a lot of alienation and friendlessness for me. I had no friend in high school. So, when you, meaning you in the generic, talk about assimilating or your identity as an American, going from immigrant to American, we know kind of what the right answer and the right mix is, but getting there is like, stumbling over rocks, getting your feet wet in mud, being caught in quagmire, questioning yourself. That's just as much a part of the journey as the right answer is the point I'm trying to make. Because I don't think that the right answer is I'm going to be American, fully assimilated and rejecting all of my history. I know that that's not the right answer. But even knowing what the right answer is it doesn't mean that I can get there in a kind of smooth and bloodless way. You draw blood along the way.
I think that's really wise. And as I was reading, I was, just thinking about, my own life and the way that as time goes on, you're accumulating experiences and, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. And you're kind of doing, like you're saying, you're doing this equilibrium of sort of picking and choosing what you want to carry on with you to the next, the next adventure and what you kind of want to let go. There's one quote, Lon, that you say somewhere in the book. You say, the key to survival, my father told me, was to know what one ought to remember and then forget it immediately. Don't look back. Don't pick at what's past. Let go. I can't tell if this advice provided illusory or real relief, but I took it in. There is only the present, which is why always is an illusory word. My mother told me the opposite, though. You cannot have the future without the past. Remember. So there's sort of this tension between letting go versus remembering. I wonder if both of you maybe could talk about that, because to me it seems like that was something that was kind of an undercurrent of all your chapters in the book.
Yes, because, all of us, whether we're immigrants or not, sometimes we find ourselves wanting two exactly contradictory things. So it's not as if the mind is so rational that it knows that, well, if I want that, it's the opposite of the other thing and I can't have both, right? Sometimes you just want both and they contradict each other. My father was very much a Buddhist, and he also had a lot of experience and battlefield experience in the war. So I think for him, he just wanted to live in the present and forget the past. And he did tell me, you have to remember what's the most important thing about the past, but then you have to forget it. So it's almost as if by pure will, you remember the most important thing, the most precious thing, for just that one snapshot, and then you just sort of not allow it to loom in your present life anymore. Maybe you remember it in the shadow of your existence, but not in your present life. And my mother always thought that it was much more something that you have to hang on to. She was much more sentimental in many ways. And it's something I struggle with all the time, because I do believe that you can be stuck in the quagmire of the past if you just bemoan the past and not use it to help you evolve. But all of this is very hard. It's a human journey. These are things that they're phrases, but to really understand and live them, it's really a process that it's like 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I like the quote that of Faulkner, I think, where he said, the past is never dead. It's not even past. So, it's always there, but it's how much do you allow it to affect you? And I think that for me, at this stage of my life, I've not been able to forget it, and that's why I write fiction and not only law review article, because law review article is very fact-based, and I'm still very haunted by the past. And I thought one way of dealing with it in a positive and creative way is to turn to writing, because writing allows you to explore all of this in some form of some framework that is containable, which is a paradox, because writing is actually very vast. The appeal of writing is that there's no limit. But at least you're entering a world where, there's the limit of a computer, 300 or 400 pages, so that's a limit. And you can put all of the reverberations of the past into that contained space of the imagination. So that's how I've dealt with the issue of the past.
I mean, I think for me, for example, I mean, I hate using this word, but with things like, I don't know, like a rape or like a sexual assault, or maybe issues with like really heavy betrayal, or like small things throughout the years that made me grow up faster than I wanted to. And it's not that I, like, when I remember them, I don't think I don't sit there and play it over in my head. Sometimes I'll analyze it and think like, what could I have done differently? I mean, I feel like everybody does that. But the main thing I found is just it manifests itself in me, because I know how much I've changed because of it. And I think it's on a subconscious level. Like, I think the human brain is wired to adapt to its experiences just so it can find a healthy balance of not making the same mistake twice. I mean, it's like, I don't know, it's almost like natural selection inside your own head. What do you want to remember? What do you want to forget? And I know a lot of times I cope by possibly misremembering at first, like with small things that really hurt me. Not small, but big things that really hurt me. I honestly coped with it by blaming myself, because if I blame myself, then it excuses me from having to do anything about it, because then I'm just like, oh, well, that was my mistake. I'll just do better next time. But when I take a step back and I realize it actually wasn't my fault, then I have this question in my head of like, what's appropriate? What do I do about it? How much do I stand up for myself? So all of that and hurting throughout the years. I mean, I think 14 and 15 and 16, those years were hardest for me, but 16 was the hardest, because by the time I was 16, I feel like I became really like hard as nail. Like at that point I overcompensated so I wouldn't feel it anymore. And by the time I hit 17, like a year ago, I think I found a pretty good balance. I think, again, like it comes from moving to schools and finding like just any form of normalcy and like a healthy relationship. So I guess the idea of letting go for me, I think it comes more from not pondering over it consciously all the time, but just I can see it. I can see my own experiences and what I've chosen to remember in my own personality and like the balance that I've found. And
as I was reading your chapters, Harlan, I thought it was it was interesting the way that you describe sort of the emotions and the feelings and kind of the nuances of not necessarily like romantic relationships, although sometimes that's the case, but just the way you interact with other people. One thing that I picked up on, kind of related to what we were just talking about, is in psychology, there's something called the bystander effect, where if some kind of crime or something horrible is happening, then, studies have shown that people tend to just kind of walk right by because they think that somebody else is going to solve the problem. Or, if you're in a big crowd of people, people kind of just assume that maybe someone else will, solve it. It's not my problem.
Right. It's Genovese.
Yes. But yeah, so I thought it was interesting, Harlan, how you kind of applied that concept to sort of the way we treat each other. So I think we all kind of hear about, the Kitty Genovese situation or, the bystander effect, and we all think we would step in and stop, some horrible, violent crime. But it turns out, and, you really made me think about the way I interact with some of my, conversations and relationships in the past, where if you're having a conversation with someone and off to the side, someone else is making fun of somebody or treating somebody bad or, talking smack about somebody, and you don't step up to advocate for that person, in a way, you're the bystander there. So I think that's a lesson that took me a long time to learn. And I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think at this point in my life, I would say if I see something, okay, so about 6 months ago, I was at a beach. There's this dog beach where everyone just takes their dogs, and there was this couple. I think they were Chinese. They did not speak good English. They had 2 tiny little dogs, and there was this family a few towels down. They were white. They had a huge dog, like literally the size of a horse, and the dad was a huge guy, like ginormous. And the Asian couple, their little dogs would go over and just to play, like they tried to play with the kid from the other family. And I guess one of the dogs accidentally kind of like nipped at the kid's ankle. So the dad became furious and walked over and like screamed in the couple's face and like said things like, "Go back to where you came from." And I think my issue is, at this point when I see it, honestly, I think over the years I've lost a sense of empathy. Like, I don't want to say in like, oh my God, I'm so scarred, like I can't even relate to anybody. That's not what I mean. I think I just like over time, if you lose trust with people, it's really hard to relate. Like, I already going into high school, it was hard for me to relate to people. And then I realized I lost it even more. So I can have sympathy, but I think I've kind of lost an empathetic streak inside of myself. But the reason why I stood up for the couple at the beach, I kind of lost my mind on him, on the big white guy, is because I think on a subconscious level, it really reminded me of my mom. And even though she's incredibly high functioning now, and I mean, from an objective standpoint, I guess she's pretty Americanized in a lot of ways. So I don't know. I think it's been a while since someone actually like treated her that badly or treated her family that badly, but I will never forget stories she's told me about it. And it really upsets me anytime somebody, not even racially, but like anytime someone attacks someone for no reason, for nothing, and the person they're attacking is already smaller and more vulnerable and not able to talk back, it triggers something inside of me. So it's not like I see it and I feel this like fire inside of myself where I'm like, oh my God, that's so unfair, I have to do something about it. There's just something inside of me. It's almost like this robotic, I don't even remember thinking to myself like I have to do something. I just did it because I know what's right and what's wrong. So at this point, I stand up for them because no one else was. But I think through high school, it's
so a lot. So what did you do for that family?
Well, I mean, I like went up to him and I was like, so what do you mean? Like, go back to where you came from. Like, go back where? Because everyone knows that's a racial remark to say, go back to where you came from. And he knew he was wrong because at that point, a crowd had come around. People were videotaping and he was like, oh, I just meant like go back to their home. I was like, no, you didn't. You did not mean that. And he left, I was like, I don't know why you're so upset. Like, this is literally a dog beach. So their dog's going to go over to your kid. Maybe like your dog is huge. And I just like reasoned with him, and he ended up leaving. But throughout high school, it's more complicated than that. Like, it's way more sensitive, just because like at a beach, I don't know anybody. So I could only benefit from helping the couple. Whereas in high school, like if there's somebody who I guess like is considered a loser or something like that, especially at that age where I was super numb, I don't know if I would have cared enough to like defend them or done anything about it. Not because I'm thinking to myself like, oh, if I help them, then I'm also going to be considered a loser. It's not something that straightforward. I think I hadn't reached a good balance at that point. I was at the point where I was just like, I'm going to survive. I'm going to stand up for myself, only myself. I'm going to try to fit in better. And that's that. So unfortunately, I wish that I had a good kind of middle ground from the start, but I definitely had to go through some things to get to that point where I would help somebody. But I do think before high school started, when I was still in like my naive stage, I would have helped anybody no matter what. Like I remember like 7th, 8th grade, there would be like those people outside of Walmart that would stand there and ask for money and say they were homeless. And my mom would tell me, because, she's my mom, she'd be like, you should help people, but you don't know if those people, like some people scam. Like some people are literally totally fine and they just pretend, and they make tens of thousands a year doing that. And there was like this Facebook forum that was warning people about certain like fake homeless people, I guess. So she would tell me that, and I would be like, well, you should give them money anyway. Like you have to, like you should always give people the benefit of the doubt. So that was me before high school.
Also, you defended the boy. You attacked the boy who attacked the dragonfly.
Well, I would still do that now because that's an animal. Animals have like a very big sweet spot for me, but yeah. So unfortunately, I feel like I've always been very one or the other, but now I think now the bystander effect situation, I think I would always do something about it.
I think kids who read this book, high school age or college age, will find a lot of things they connect with because of this situation where with social media or with just the way, school is constructed in America, like there's these webs of connection, and sometimes it feels like it could almost be impossible to stand up for somebody and kind of be the upstander as opposed to the bystander, because like you were saying, there's so many factors involved, and there's so many ways that even seemingly benign situations can lead to problems. So I was wondering if you guys felt like there's a issue with social media or with high school culture or with kind of the way we educate kids. Lon, do you see anything that has changed since your experience in high school, or how do you view that?
My experience in high school, of course, this was in the 70s. We're talking about 75 to 79 were my high school years. And there was no computer, no cell phone, no social media, just a typewriter, right, basically. And no email, nothing. So even though there was a lot of bullying in my high school, and I think it had to do, and the bullying, some of it was active, and some of it was just kind of like you're flicked away, right? So it's not, you could be bullied because you're ignored and flicked away and ostracized, as well as being taunted, right? But there's a feeling, at least when I was in high school, that when you leave your school, like that ends, unless they're in your neighborhood. Now, of course, there were people in my neighborhood who were like the popular kids who were willing to bully. But the good thing was that because I was such an outlier, probably viewed like a pest, like it's not even worth their time to spend their non-high school hours or hours outside of high school to harass me. So because of that, it was just indifference. So when you leave high school, it's over. and you're not a threat enough for the bullying to continue outside of high school. I feel like nowadays there's no escape, because you leave high school, most of the stuff that's happening that is full of vitriol is on social media. And Harlan continues to tell me that the worst thing I've ever done as a mother was to take away her cell phone, which I thought was the conduit through which some of the more nasty stuff was happening. And I just felt like, the phone, the smartphone was a distraction from learning. It perpetuated the 24-hour cycle of negativity and bad news. You could never escape it. And, even there was some, what is it called? Snapchat or yes, where you can write something horrific and there would be no trace of it, right? So it's not like you can even say, here it is in a text and bring it to the administrators. So I just thought this is just a perpetual vicious cycle, and I wanted to remove her from it. But apparently, if you don't have the phone, you're further ostracized. So I think that is an extremely insidious vehicle that is both sort of the kid's lifeline as well as the noose around their neck. So the same thing can do both. And I think that there's no real solution, because I did take away the phone. And during the period when she was having the most trouble in high school with kind of like slut shaming and things like that, I insisted that we go to the principal's office or the vice principal's office and get the school involved. And in the end, I felt like we needed to do it, even though she was very reluctant. She didn't want to do it. And I had to override her because, this was during the time when the Me Too movement was beginning and Harvey Weinstein. And I just didn't feel like all this stuff was brewing in the outside world and we're just going to do nothing in our own house. So we did something, but in the end, having done that, it didn't change anything, because we ended up having to leave the high school and moving to a different high school, like right in the middle of the school year. It was very disruptive. I think it turned out to be a good move for her because she was able to leave that high school. But the one that left, we were the one that left. We were the one that endured the disruption and having to start over. So, it's not something that you can really say there's only one right way to handle something, because whichever way you choose will have its downside. I think doing nothing would have had its downside too, except we don't know what the downside is because it's the road not taken. The road we took, which I think was the right road, had a lot of negative unintended consequences, which is not to say it's the wrong route, but those unintended consequences did come back to bite us because we had to leave and start all over, which made me feel extremely frustrated because I wanted her to have a good high school experience that is different from mine.
As you were kind of talking there, I was thinking about one of the things that I talk about on this podcast is I call them like narratives in history. There's certain stories that get kind of told and just accepted in history. And sometimes when you dig into them with a little more nuance and you kind of get into the nitty gritty of it, it turns out, wait a second, there's a whole lot more to this story. And actually it's a little bit more nuanced. And to me, it seems like it's almost like everybody now has their own personal narrative going on, their own personal kind of historical tale that they are able to tell about themselves with, whether it's social media or, the appearance they put on at work or at school or wherever. And it turns out when you kind of investigate, things aren't always as they seem. And to me, that seems like a good reason to kind of just treat the average person with respect and not make assumptions about them or not do anything that would jeopardize their psychological well-being. But it feels like we're doing the opposite of that. At least that's what it feels like. Harlan, would you agree with that at all? Are you hopeful for the high school situation, or would you say it's off the cliff at this point?
Well, thing is okay, with high school and the social situation, I just want to say, like, with what my mom was talking about with social media and stuff, um, I think with spreading things about people and rumors and hurting people's lives and not caring, it's interesting because social media for me, it was never like that straightforward. Like, it's not like people make posts saying like Harlan's a slut or so and so is like the N word. Those things are more in person, but it's more like social media causes everybody to grow up a lot faster, and it's this like totally twisted like idea of what is maturity. Like, girls who are 17, they literally look 25 online because of the way they're dressing and because of the things that they choose to post. And so to them, like, that's maturity, is like the number of followers that you have and how good you look and like how many people believe what you say. But it was never like all the things about spreading and not caring about people's lives. I think that just comes from like this certain ignorance, and I've never understood it that much, just because, again, like as I said, I've never cared enough about what people are doing to even talk about it. I've always stayed in my own lane, and I think the issue, especially now, even with adults, like not just in high school, especially in 2020, it's just people are not. I don't know what the word is. I guess like conscientious of each other. Is that the right word, Mom? Like considerate of mindful. Each other. Yeah, like mindful. I think in terms of like assumptions becoming accepted, I can't speak for everybody, but I think for teenagers, obviously the idea of reality is your version of reality comes from only your point of view. Like, it depends on how mature you want to be. If you want to think about everyone's point of view, then obviously your idea of reality isn't going to be as convenient as you would like. But people in general, especially in high school, I feel like it's whoever says the thing first, that's going to be the dominant idea. Because for me at the time, if a rumor was spread about me, it would be because I did not have time to go in before and clarify it, because I didn't think it would even be a problem. Like, for something like becoming sexually active, for example, in high school, like, to me, maybe I was naive. It's not anyone else's business. So I didn't feel the need to clarify, like, this is what was done. This is why I did, like, at that age, like 14, 15, where it's such a big deal for everybody to become sexually active. I guess I can understand why rumors would spread and like slut shaming happens, but it's avoidable in terms of like the dominant idea of like a girl being a slut. That's avoidable if the girl goes in first and explains herself. So I feel like it always, even though she shouldn't have to, but as you said, like the idea of it's all to me about who said it first and how many people they said it to. Unfortunately, I think even like, I don't know if you've probably read 1984. They say like the sanity is not about reality, and sanity is not about how many people believe it. It shouldn't be, even though in that book it is. So it's the same for high school. It's all about the mass idea.
Yeah, I think you actually explained what I was kind of trying to say and didn't really explain well, but it's almost like me even saying that social media is a problem is its own narrative. Like you said, right. There's not people, I mean, there might be, but there's not people out there just posting Harlan's an idiot and you know, and then going from there, it's kind of this way that the people are incentivized to want to post certain things that, you know, then that leads to people behaving in a certain way, which, you know, and there's all these crazy nuances, and we're asking, you know, kids who, a lot of times don't have, you know, the supports in place to be able to kind of deal with this nuanced kind of social web that pretty much every kid, you know, in some form or another has to deal with. And then you put the added layer of social media on there. I don't know. I feel like the way you explained it in the book was interesting to think about.
Thank you. I tried. It's very sensitive. Like, that topic, the high school chapters is definitely the most sensitive for me, because I don't know. I think looking back, if I read it in even like a year or 2 years, I want to have taken all sides into account. Like, I never want it to seem like I think that I'm above everybody else in my school, or that everyone else just hasn't been as experienced or anything. Like, that's not what I'm trying to say at all. So it's very hard to find a good way. I mean, I did it really quickly, actually. Like, I think the high school chapters took me the shortest amount of time, believe it or not, just because I've always been the type to like rip off a band-aid. It's almost like writing that part is almost like going through therapy, but by yourself, and then thinking that everyone's going to read it. So, and I'm sure, I mean, my experiences are probably very mellow in comparison to what a lot of girls go through. Like, I have friends who have told me very privately about, I mean, there was like this girl I remember at my high school, and there was this rumor about her that she wasn't coming to school because she was taking care of like some STDs or something like that, and everyone called her a whore. And then later I like found out that she had actually been like violently raped, and then she was pregnant, so she had to take care of it, and she just didn't care to correct it because I feel like that's so traumatic. So I have to be very fragile about how I talk about it.
Right. Of course. There's kind of this way that both of you are kind of pursuing the American dream. So, Lon, I think you mentioned this idea of the American dream a lot in the book, and there's this way that kind of both of you have gone through these struggles and gone through these nuances and dealing with pain and life experience. I was wondering, Lon, if you could speak to that a little bit. How do you define the American dream?
Well, there's a collective American dream, and there is a individual American dream, which each person crafts out for herself or himself, right? So the collective American dream to me is this idea of America, right? That it is this place that you flee towards because you are leaving some calamity in your home country. And you are going into this place in the horizon that opens its arm. It doesn't mean that's going to be smooth just because somebody opens its arm. That you could have your own capsizing experience even in the American dream. But it's there, it beckons you, and you head towards it because it is at least calmer waters than where you're fleeing from. And I think in many ways that is correct. To me, at least, it's correct. Because if you look at just facts on the ground, I'm not subscribing to any theory. Like, I'm not trying to be, a neocon or a Republican or a Democrat. There's no theory here. I'm just looking at the facts. I mean, people want to come to America, right? It's not a place where people are trying to flee from. So that's a fact. I don't see throngs and throngs of people leaving their home country and risking everything, let's say, to arrive in the Soviet Union when it still existed, or to arrive in China, or to arrive in Russia. So there is something about America that people are going towards, whatever your political ideals or your political framework is. That's a fact. So that is the American dream, right? There's this idea that it's a shining city on a hill. Whether it's true or not, or whether it's always shining or not, right? Of course, there is like two sides to a coin. I think from the very inception of the country, there's this bright side, come to me, right? I'm the Statue of Liberty. But there's the not so bright side, which, for example, even Benjamin Franklin was very, very skeptical of the German immigrants. He didn't want them coming to Philadelphia because he thought they cannot be assimilated into the English mindset. So even as early as that, there's always been this tug of war in this American dream that basically is a duality. And what the immigrants like me want is to bring out the beautiful side, the shining city on the hillside of America, because that's why we came. And if we didn't believe in it, we wouldn't have left everything, risked everything, including safety, to be here. So that's the collective American dream that I'm talking about. And I think it is a reality, and it's very powerful because, as I said, I don't see people leaving their country on boats and maybe drowning to go to Russia. So you can't say there is no such American dream. And then on a personal level, what's great about it is that you can create your own dream. I think a lot of us go through maybe wanting to be mainstream, because when you first arrive, I think you want to fit in. And sometimes wanting to fit in is meaning you want to be like everybody. And I mentioned that in my experience, the only way I thought I could fit in was through education. But by pursuing education, I actually alienated myself from everybody. So in the short run, it didn't bring me any peace in high school. It's certainly through education I have done what I needed to do. So I'm glad about that. But I defined my own dream, right? I was never, once I got to college, I was never interested in the American dream as a kind of keeping up with the Joneses success story. I had a very different personality maybe, and what I was drawn to was different than the typical success story of, making a certain amount of money and being part of the middle or the middle upper class, 2 cars. That was never my thing. I mean, I went to law school for stability, but not like to bring in that constant excitement of a litigator's life. So, the thing about the American dream is after the collective part, you have the individual part. And I think the country basically does give you the freedom to choose what you want to do, to question the mainstream, to pursue a more artistic life, even though it may be more unstable. So I think it's a very unique and individualized dream once you get in.
Sure. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to discuss or anything you wanted to bring up?
Well, I think that, the book, I think I want to talk a little bit about how the book has a lot of appeal for many different readers. I think for people who are interested in history, of course, there's a lot of history about the Vietnam War in there, or about some of the topics that grip our country right now: migration, immigration, the American dream, what American values are. But then, there's a lot, as we've been talking about, that would really resonate with teenagers. And, you don't have to be the child of immigrants, as Harlan is, to have the kind of story she has, which is, all of us having the universal desire to fit in. And it could be in high school or in society. So in that way, I hope that the book will be able to bridge multi-generations and can speak to a kind of universal desire to fit in, to be accepted, which all of us want, whether we're in our 50s or in our teens in high school.
I mean, I just want to say, I know the book is parts of it are very intense. Obviously, a lot of the stuff isn't going to be totally relatable, but I think the parts that are, hopefully we pointed to those things subtly enough to where it can make a difference in the life of whoever reads it, but not in a way that's overbearing. And I feel really grateful to have been given the opportunity to write something like this, just because I know, even for movies that are so highly celebrated, a lot of the movies or books, the story, the plot itself is nothing super extraordinary. Everybody's life has some form of irony or drama or something really special. So I just feel really lucky that I could tell my story and have sort of my relationship with my mother wrap itself up in its own kind of piece of art or work. So
yeah, I think at some point you said you were talking about music, but you said it's not about the words, it's about the feelings, and to me that really resonated, really for the whole book as a whole. But yeah, I want to say thank you so much to both of you. Appreciate you guys coming on, and best of luck going forward.
Thank you so much for having us.